After far too long since TennoCon, a whole 5 months of uncontainable excitement, the old piece is finally coming, and with it comes our newest Warframe, Uriel, in all his glory. Number 63, 3 6s, 666 health and shields, horns and a pointy tail, flies like a bat out of hell and does a ton of heat damage, and has 3 little evil friends who hang out over his shoulder. I hate to say this, but I think Uriel might be devil themed, but I don't know what's quite giving me that idea. Bad jokes aside, he might just be one of the most interesting frames that's been introduced to Warframe for me, not just because he's a minion frame, and I'm a huge fan of minion-based gameplay, so I'm totally not biased at all, I swear, but because of how those minions and Uriel interact and work together to bring a special kind of evil to the game. So let's chat about how you can get your hands on him yourself, how he and his minions' abilities work, and then let's go over a few builds that I've cooked up for you all to mess around with and to give you some inspiration for your own builds, each with a bit of a twist for you to enjoy our newest frame in whatever way you feel like. But first, a massive thanks to Digital Extremes and Warframe for sponsoring today's video and letting me get an early peek in our latest and greatest frame on their test servers to share with you all early. You can get your hands on Uriel December 10th with the release of the old piece for free as usual, so make sure to check out the link in the description for more information on the old piece and to sign up and begin your Tenno journey at warframe.com. You can play on basically all platforms these days, even iPhones, and it's even currently on closed beta for Androids. Make sure to check it out if you haven't yet. Before we get started, I've got a quick disclaimer. Since I'll be doing all my build crafting, testing, and recording on the test server for the old piece, all the information is accurate to the best of my abilities, but depending on when you're watching this video, things may have changed. So keep an eye on the pinned comment in the description for any corrections or drastically important updates that may have happened in the meantime from recording date on the test build to the official old piece release. With that out of the way, let's get into it. First things first, how to get your hands on Uriel yourself. Of course, just like always, you're able to farm him completely for free. You'll get the main blueprint as a reward for completing the old piece quest, and his 3 component blueprints are farmable through the Descendia, one of the 2 new game modes that came with a patch. As usual, there's a pity system if you're having some bad luck getting the blueprints to drop from the mission rewards, where you can buy his blueprints from Roth in the La Cathedral in the Sanctum Adanomica for Mafrika, which drops from the Descendia. If you're wanting to skip the farm, you can of course also buy his bundle for Platinum that comes with him, his Asmodean alternative helmet, the new Vinquibus bayonet, whose build I'll have out in a few days, the Grand Carnus Regalia for your Operator or Drifter, the Infernum Throne decoration, and a 3-day affinity booster. If you're short on plat, you can also buy that bundle for real world currency and it'll come with 275 Platinum. There's also the old piece complete collection that comes with everything in that bundle, the 3 new Gemini skins for Wisp, Harrow, and Uriel himself, as well as a 7-day resource booster and 750 Platinum. You can also get Uriel on his own for 370 Platinum from the market. Alright, now let's take a look at Uriel and his summons abilities and how they all work together. We're gonna have to break this down a bit oddly this time, as his 3 summons, which are his passive, are tied to his first 3 abilities. So just keep in mind that each ability will have 2 sections, one for the ability on its own and one for the passive aspect. Now the reason why I'm doing it in this way is because unlike other passives in Warframe, Uriel's 3 minions, Catenach, Gulphagor, and Vythelas' abilities will also be affected by your mods. The 3 summons will also draw fire away from Uriel, giving him a bit of extra passive survivability while they're active. It's important to note that while he's a minion frame, due to the more caster-oriented nature of Uriel's minions, I found that Summoner's Wrath isn't all that great of a choice. However, Gulphagor and Catenach's damage does activate Arcane Commissado, which is great. Commissado is actually incredible on Uriel because of course the strength for himself on his next cast, as well as giving the minions a bit of a speed boost. But as it increases his strength, it'll also affect his minions' abilities as well without consuming the charge. Another awesome thing that I'm really grateful for is that I was a bit worried that if we helmet over one of his abilities, we'd lose the minion associated with that ability. But the good news is that's not the case, and if you helmet over one of his abilities, he'll keep that corresponding minion, giving Uriel some really impressive build crafting options. His first ability is Infernalis. When you activate it, you and his demons will gain a fire aura that will deal heat damage and status effects every second to enemies in range. That's already pretty neat, but then when you jump while it's active and do a dodge, Uriel will turn into a fiery comet to fly around the battlefield. While flying about, if you aim, you'll start to aim glide so that you can fire off a bunch of shots, and then when you stop aiming, you'll continue to fly around in the air with another dodge. You can also melee slam out of Infernalis, and you can stop flying by landing on the ground or tapping your dodge again while the flying is active. And you can turn off Infernalis if you want to by hold casting the ability. Because this counts as being airborne, mods like Aviator and other airborne effects do work with this, giving Uriel some surprising levels of survivability and some neat potential synergies. Unfortunately, while you're flying around, you aren't able to reload or cast his other abilities, so you will need to go into aim glide in order to do either of those. And before you ask, yes, parkour velocity does affect its flight speed. Now onto the summon side of things for Infernalis, we have Catenach. This little winged devil here will chain up to 5 enemies when it comes within 9 meters of them. Those 5 enemies will take a small amount of damage from the chains, be slowed by up to 95%, and share damage between them like Kulivo's Collective Curse, which is incredibly powerful as it gives Uriel some surprisingly high multi-target damage. Insanely, Catenach's chains also don't seem to have a cooldown, so it'll just keep chaining enemies together continuously for you as long as it's in range to cast it. Next, we have his second ability, Remedium. It's pretty basic, but you'll be finding yourself needing to use it fairly frequently, as it will resummon his demons back to his side if they've met an untimely demise. More importantly, while it's being cast, Uriel is invulnerable to damage, it'll heal Uriel and his minions, including giving back shields and even overshields, and do a status cleanse. You can easily keep an eye on your minion's health and status with the UI element here in the bottom right, so that you know when you need to cast it to keep Uriel's friends active. Some of you might be thinking that that isn't all that great, but let me tell you, this ability in my mind is irreplaceable as the minions have a fairly long respawn time without the ability. And you're going to want to keep them alive and active as much as possible due to his fourth ability, Brimstone, which we'll get into in a bit. And its shield and health regeneration is just way too good. Also, this is his helmet ability. But you don't get Gulphagor if you helmet it onto another frame, which makes sense considering it is Uriel's passive. For the passive side, this ability is tied to Gulphagor, this bundle of overly friendly flying tentacles. Gulphagor will latch onto an enemy's face, stunning them as they struggle with their new forced friend, dealing some damage, and put this icon above their heads to indicate whose personal space Gulphagor is currently invading. When you take down that enemy, they'll spawn a bunch of health and energy orbs and put down a small fire AoE on the ground. The number of orbs dropped scales with strength, greatly increasing the number of health and energy orbs spawned when you kill them. This utility means that Equilibrium or the violet Archon shards that have the same effect are especially useful on Uriel to convert all those health orbs into a constant supply of energy, and in my mind should be an auto-include on most builds due to that synergy. Gulphagor does have about a 6-second cooldown between latchings that start when you either deal with Gulphagor's latest friend or when the duration expires, so if you're having any energy concerns, make sure to keep an eye out for the marked enemy to get the cooldown rolling faster for more orb drops. Uriel's third ability, Demonium, will siphon a part of their souls, aka drain a chunk of their health, and send out 3 spectral versions of themselves that will target enemies in front of Uriel. When it hits an enemy, it will do a small explosion, dealing a bit of heat damage, and the spirits will bounce around between enemies, causing an explosion with each impact. Everything hit by the explosion will get a damage vulnerability debuff, greatly increasing your overall damage. Demonium has a synergy with Infernalis, where if you have it active when you cast Demonium, the spectral versions of your minions that this ability throws out will also apply heat status effects. And the last aspect of the passive is Vythelas, who will wander up to recently slain enemies to perform a ritual that will spawn a rune in the air above the deceased foe. When you walk through that rune, you'll gain increased fire rate to your weapons and bonus heat damage to your ranged weapons, which you can see affecting them with his UI element on your weapon. Unfortunately, the heat damage doesn't apply to incarnate forms, but the fire rate will. Your allies can also pick up these runes to get that buff, giving Uriel a bit more of a squad utility. An odd thing is that if there's no runes currently active and floating about the air, Vythelas will spawn one right away, but if there's one able to be grabbed, there's about a 12-second cooldown before he'll do another ritual, and it seems that only 3 runes can be active at once during a mission. A neat thing is that the runes are a little bit off the ground so that you're able to easily fly through them while flying with Infernalis. Thankfully, the runes do show up on the minimap because they are a bit hard to see with everything else going on in missions, and you'll be wanting to pick up these runes as much as possible due to his fourth ability, Brimstone. When you cast Brimstone, it will set the whole area on fire for its duration, dealing heat damage and status effects every half second to all enemies in range, and it will go through terrain and up and down levels, letting it cover a much wider area than you might have initially thought. The really interesting thing with Brimstone is that its damage increases the longer it's affecting the enemy, up to a maximum of 10 times damage, leading to some pretty insane damage being dealt to everyone who dares to enter Hell's domain. Now, this seems really good, and don't get me wrong, it is, but you really need to be on your game to keep it as active as possible. By this point, you might have noticed this bar in the bottom right of the screen under your summon's health, which you need to fill up in order to cast Brimstone. The meter can be filled through your minions' abilities being cast and you interacting with those abilities, such as killing the enemy that Gulphagor is latched to, dealing damage to chained enemies by Catenach, picking up runes summoned by Vythelas, and dealing damage with Demonium. So in order to get that bar filled as fast as possible so that you can recast Brimstone, you're going to need to be keeping an eye and reacting to what your minions are doing and using Demonium frequently. The nice thing is that you can work on getting another cast of Brimstone going while it's active, so I'd recommend casting it as soon as possible to get another cast charged quickly. It takes a bit of practice to make sure you're doing all of those things to keep feeding the bar, but the reward of bringing hell on earth is well worth the effort. because it just does so much freaking damage. So it makes sense that you'll need to put in the effort to cast it considering how strong it is. Now that we know how his abilities work, how exactly does Uriel play in missions? I find that he's a fantastic weapon platform caster hybrid, where you're going to be weaving his abilities into your gunplay to dish out some really impressive damage, all while interacting and working with your summons to maximize your combat efficiency. With his high sustainability from Remedium for Uriel and his summons, those summons attracting enemy attention, and the health and energy orb generation from his passive, he's incredibly durable and has great self-sustain, allowing you to focus more on the other aspects of his gameplay. Like we went over in the abilities section, I highly suggest that you keep an eye on what your minions are doing during the mission for their buffs, damage amplification, and sustain utility, but more importantly, in order to charge Brimstone as quickly as possible. Generally speaking, you're going to want to keep your Infernalis as active as possible, cast Remedium when needed for your sustain as well as keeping your minions active, throw Demonium into large groups of enemies for the damage vulnerability debuff and to help charge Brimstone, and then cast Brimstone as soon as you're able to for its damage in order to get its next cast going a bit sooner. Now let's get into the builds. You're able to play Uriel in a wide variety of ways, but here's 4 different builds for you all today to give you some inspiration. First up is a beginner build, then one focused on flying around in Infernalis, a generalized weapon platform that can be used as either melee or ranged with a wide variety of different helmet options, and one where we're focusing more on casting and letting it all burn down with Brimstone. Here's the basic beginner build for those who are newer to Warframe, and you won't even need an Archon reactor to get you started. Uriel really wants strength, range, and duration, so that's what we're going to be focusing on here. We have Dreamer's Bond for a bit of health and energy sustain, Flow to increase our maximum energy, Augur Reach and Stretch to increase the range of all of his abilities, Intensify to boost up his damage and buff up his minions a bit, Continuity to increase the duration of Infernalis and Brimstone, and Vitality to increase your survivability. If you've got an Archon reactor installed to double your mod capacity, I'd suggest adding an Equilibrium, Power Drift, and Augur Secrets to increase your sustainability by turning those health orbs into energy and vice versa, and more strength to improve everything he does. For our endgame builds, here's the Archon Shards that we're going to be using for all 3. I have 1 Tau Forged Amber to increase his cast speed just to improve that aspect a bit, 2 Tau Forged Violets with the Equilibrium function for our energy and health sustain, and the last 2 are completely flex spots. I've gone with just more strength, but Topaz Shards for increasing secondary critical chance is another excellent option, but use whatever makes the most sense for your preferred playstyle. Our first build is based all around keeping him airborne to take advantage of Infernalis' flying mechanics and mods that grant him damage reduction while airborne to really make him incredibly durable. The whole idea is to keep flying for as long as you're able to, then aiming to activate Aim Glide to rain hell down upon your enemies with your weapons, all while your minions are doing their thing to keep your energy up and increasing your overall damage with Gulphagor's orb generation, Vythelas' runes which you can fly through while in Infernalis to pick up its buff, and Catenach's chains spreading damage around. One thing that I'd recommend is that you want to keep kind of close-ish to the ground to allow your minions to do their thing, because they all do have relatively shorter ranges on their abilities. This kind of playstyle does take some time to get used to, I won't lie to you. It took me a while to get into the swing of things with the aim glide shooting into dodge to keep the flying active, but once you get a feel for it, it's incredibly fun to play. I'm not using a helmet on this build here today, as I found that I was just enjoying all of his normal abilities, but if I were, I'd probably throw it over Brimstone, as I find it's a bit difficult to get Brimstone charged while focusing on flying so much, and any classic weapon platform helmet will do you well, which I'll be going over in the next section. Here's the build, and like I said earlier, we'll be using a few mods to give extra survivability while airborne with the likes of Aerodynamic, Aviator, and Boreal's Hatred. I've gone with some pretty high range so that Infernalis, Demonium, and Brimstone can really hit a large number of enemies for damage and damage amplification, and with the amount of strength we have from Umbral Intensify, Blind Rage, Molt Augmented, and Arcane Commissado, we'll be doing a ton of damage from everything. Personally, I really love Archon Vitality on Uriel so that we'll be applying more heat effects with all of our abilities, as well as the extra health, just to increase our damage and survivability a bit more. Honestly though, I've probably thrown on too much airborne survivability here, but I also live by the phrase of no such thing as overkill, so feel free to remove 1 or 2 of those, or maybe throw on a polearm for the Boreal set mod to free up a mod here on Uriel, if you really want to, since we'll be using our ranged weapons. The melee slot is freed up for that if you really like it. Our second build is geared more towards being a classic gun platform, playing around Vythelas' runes, increasing our fire rate and giving bonus heat damage for our ranged weapons. We'll be using our abilities to fuel our weapons' damage with the damage vulnerability from Demonium, sustaining ourselves with Remedium, and letting Brimstone rip anytime that it's charged up. I personally tend to not run this with a helmet, but if you're wanting to use one, I would probably put it over Infernalis, as for the way that I play, it ended up being the least needed of the 4 abilities. But the more important question is what ability are you putting on top of it? Of course, Rhinor's Roar is, as usual, a great option, especially for Uriel due to it affecting his abilities damage, double dipping on the heat status effects damage, as well as of course increasing his weapons damage. But other great choices are any of the other classic weapon platform subsumes. Mirage's Eclipse, Zaku's Zada's Whisper, Gauss's Thermal Sunder with Thermal Transfer, Volt's Shock with Shock Trooper, Grendel's Nourish if you need more energy. You know, the usual good weapon platform helmets. Any of them are good here. For the build, I'm focusing more on high strength with decent duration to amp up our helmet of choice and making it so that we don't need to cast it and his other abilities as frequently. Since we're going to be more land-based here, of course I've gone with everyone's favorite, Prime Sure-Footed, just so that we don't have to worry about knockdowns, but throw on whatever Excellence that makes the most sense for your helmet and playstyle. I've gone with Adaptation this time to help out with our survivability, but if I'm being honest with you, it's not really necessary as the minions generally keep enemies occupied enough that you're rarely taking large chunks of damage. And then you're able to top yourself and those minions off with Remedium, but Adaptation's good to have here nonetheless. Now if you've gone with a helmet that requires an augment, I'd throw it over Augur Message, as while the duration is nice to have, you can work around it fairly easily. But if you like the duration and aren't having survivability issues, swap whatever augment you're using with Adaptation. For Arcanes, I've once again gone with Kamisado for the extra strength for our minions' abilities and to snapshot that strength into either our helmet or Brimstone. If you have gone with a helmet and put it over Infernalis, I don't know if I'd personally use Arcane Hotshot, as keeping it active in missions is a bit inconsistent without Infernalis and the sometimes long time that it takes to charge up Brimstone. So make sure that you give it a test to see if you're able to maintain it without concern, and if you're having problems then I'd just swap this out for Molt Augmented for more power strength. For our final build, we're focusing all in on Brimstone and the insane damage output that it has, and I personally play this more as a caster than a weapon platform, though of course it still does the pew pew good. Since you can charge your next Brimstone while Brimstone's active, the idea is to get it out, let our insanely high duration keep it going while you run around with your minions doing everything you can to get the next cast charge, and then rinse and repeat. This time, I do really enjoy using Nova's Null Stars and its Augment Neutron Stars, both for its damage reduction, giving us a good chunk more survivability, but also for its damage output with its blast and heat effects. Of course, a no-helmet version works really well too with the Infernalis and Demonium synergies. And on that point, you're going to want to be casting Demonium a ton here to charge Brimstone as quickly as possible to maintain it, but you will need to be mindful of your energy due to the amount of casting you'll be doing. Oddly enough, because of just how much damage Brimstone does, you'll want to throw it down in a room, and then you're going to need to wander around a bit to be able to find enemies that live long enough for you to actually get your next Brimstone charged up, because everything is going to die before it gets into range of your minions to do their abilities and Demonium. I also 100% recommend using Zenerek here, because we'll be eating through our energy like no tomorrow, and we're going to need as much energy as possible to get Brimstone charged. For this build mods, we're sacrificing a lot of ability strength to increase our duration a ton, both so that we can chain Brimstones back to back and also increase the number of particles from Null Stars. At this point, we're going to be spitting out a ton of damage from blast and heat procs from Null Stars and its Augment Neutron Stars, and since we're already using Archon Vitality to boost up all the other heat effects that we're doing, we're getting a little bit of extra utility from that mod. Now you might be wondering, why Archon Stretch, Streamer Man? Nothing here does electric, which you're right, but good news is that some companion abilities will activate it, giving us a bit more energy sustain, which we're gonna need everything that we can get. With that in mind, instead of Arcane Kamisado on this build, we have Arcane Energized. But Arcane Steadfast is a good alternative if you don't have Energized yet, and like the others, we have Molt Augmented for more power strength to help out with orb spawning and our overall damage output. And there we go, Uriel, the devil of the Orokin, has finally come at last. I absolutely love checking him out and being able to do a bit of some weird but also classic build crafting, and his overall gameplay loop with him and his minions actually working together to deal insane amount of damage is just a ton of fun and really rewarding when you get the gameplay loop down. I hope that you enjoyed the builds, and I hope that you got some inspiration to make something cool yourself when the old piece launches on December 10th. Let me know in the comments what you think of the builds, about Uriel and his 3 amigos, and let me know what you're most excited about for in the old piece. Thank you again to Digital Extremes and Warframe for sponsoring today's video and for getting me early access to the test server so that I can give you all a glimpse of just how cool our latest frame is. Be sure to check out the old piece coming out December 10th and click the link in the description for more information and to begin your Tenno journey at warframe.com. And as always, sub for more tips and swing by my stream if you need any help.